European Union's election observation mission also consists of 40 long-term observers. On election day, our mission was reinforced by short-term observers recruited from the diplomatic community who are well represented here today, as well as my colleagues from the European Parliament. Altogether, our team is composed of over 110 observers, representing citizens from 25 EU member states and from Canada, Norway and Switzerland. I would like to thank the delegation of the European Union located here in Abuja, European Union member states, as well as Canada, Norway and Switzerland, EU institutions, as well as international organisations participating on or contributing in any way to our mission. I'd also like to express my appreciation to my colleagues from the European Union Parliament, the European Parliament, in particular my friend and colleague Mrs. Evan Inchier, who is the head of delegation, and thank you for all of your excellent cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, on Saturday, Nigeria went to the polls for the 7th time since the restoration of democracy in 1999. I want to express my gratitude to the millions of Nigerian voters that cast their vote in the Presidential, Senate and House of Representatives elections on Saturday, despite prevailing challenges. I commend the commitment and determination of voters, especially of the youth, who have contributed hugely to the democratic process. Today, the election process is far from finished. The mission is now only in a position to comment on observation undertaken to date, and we do not comment on the ongoing collation in a substantial way. The following remarks are therefore preliminary in nature on the process observed so far. So let me start with a summary of the main findings of our observations. Nigerians went to the polls in the highly anticipated Presidential National Assembly elections, with Inec notably kept on schedule despite a volatile and challenging environment. Fundamental freedoms of assembly and movement were largely respected, yet the full enjoyment of the latter was impeded by insufficient planning, insecurity, and the prevailing naira and fuel shortages, particularly in the weeks before the election day. Abuse of incumbency by various political office holders distorted the playing field, and there were allegations widespread of vote buying. Media provided an extensive coverage of the three leading campaigns, but disinformation interfered with voters' right to make an informed choice on election day. Let me go into the details of our findings. First, about Inec. Inec was, of course, challenged by the ongoing fuel and cash shortage. Insecurity prevented Inec from accessing some areas, and it suffered attacks on its premises and personnel, including just days before polling. This hindered preparations in affected areas and instilled fear in voters. Overall, stakeholders expressed confidence in Inec's independence and professionalism and voter information efforts earlier in the process. However, there was a lack of efficient planning during critical stages of the electoral process, as well as a lack of transparency. On election day, delayed polling processes and insufficient information related to access to results on its results viewing portal, which reduced trust in Inec. In particular, presidential election results forms only started to be uploaded after 10 p.m. on election day. By noon yesterday, it had reached 20%. This is of serious concern, in particular given the high expectations given Inec's commitments in this regard. On a positive note, the new Electoral Act in February last year introduced measures aimed at building stakeholder trust. Amongst others, Inec benefited from more timely financing under the new law. However, there were some gaps in terms of accountability and enforcement of the law, including insufficient sanctions for electoral offences and breaches of campaign finance rules. There was a lot of expectations regarding the use of technologies in these elections. The introduction of the bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, and the IREV was perceived as an important step to ensure the integrity of the election campaign. Almost 10 million additional voters were registered ahead of the polls. A majority of them, 2/3, were youth, a result of mobilization efforts during the registration period. Yet the collection of permanent voter cards, which is required to vote, was affected by poor planning. An audit of the voter register could have increased quality and inclusiveness. Party primaries were affected by a lack of transparency and inclusiveness, with notable very low participation of women and youth. The lack of legal measures for inclusion and barriers is of concern. The conduct of contesting parties and candidates, as well as some gaps in the law, led to a spate of pre-election court cases, with some matters not finalised ahead of elections. The campaign was highly competitive and contestants conducted rallies nationwide. But the Naira cash and fuel scarcity reduced activities and attendance. Political parties denounced unequal campaign conditions due to interference, and there were frequent reports of vote and PVC buying. There was a lack of prosecution of electoral offences and a significant increase in violent incidents with the potential to disturb the elections and suppress voter participation, particularly in the southeast. Even if challenged by a number of factors, such as economic hardship and electoral violence, media offered an extensive campaign coverage. Major parties received fairly equitable coverage. Unfortunately, analytical reporting on party policies was limited, and key candidates refused to participate in debates, thereby undermining voters' right to an informed choice. Social media platforms were misused to spread harmful content, including disinformation on key political processes. The measures the platforms took to protect electoral integrity were insufficient. Misleading information also came from political actors, contributing to a blurred information environment for voters. On a positive note, online and offline media joined forces with civil society and fact-checkers to safeguard the integrity of the pre-election information environment. Furthermore, civil society organisations observed and scrutinised different aspects of the election, offering voters a non-partisan assessment of election preparations. Overall, almost 150,000 participated in Election Day observation, contributing to the transparency of the process. The tabulation exercise is still ongoing. This is a crucial period of time for Nigeria. I encourage stakeholders to continue demonstrating commitment to a peaceful process before and after the results are announced. Any dispute arising from the process should be addressed through established legal channels. As we speak, our observers are present at the collation centres observing the ongoing process. The mission continues to follow the ongoing process related to the Presidential and National Assembly elections to its conclusion and will continue its activities also for the 11th of March Governor and Local State Council elections. In 2 to 3 months' time after the end of the process, our mission will deliver a final report that will include recommendations addressing issues identified. Thank you very much for your attention.
This is the seventh time that an EU election observation mission has been deployed to your country here in Nigeria. Our presence, both in the past and now, demonstrates the significance with the European Union which the European Union attaches to Nigeria, its people, and of course its democratic institutions. The European Parliament, directly elected by around 450 million European citizens, also observed these elections as a part of the European Election Observation Mission. In fact, this is the 5th time that the delegation of our European Parliament has been part of the EU mission. First and foremost, I want to express our full endorsement of the findings presented today by my colleague, the Chief Observer, Mr. Barry Andrews. I thank him for his work and cooperation. I would also like to express my thanks to the Nigerian authorities for the invitation to observe the elections and support provided to us to conduct our mission. In the past days, we have met with the Foreign Minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the Chair of the Independent National Electoral Commission, the Inec, the President and judges of the Court of Appeal, religious leaders, civil society organizations, and media representatives. We would like to express our gratitude to them for having made time for us. These are the first elections which have been organized under the 2022 Electoral Act. This includes the increased use of technology, and most of our interlocutors prior to the election day welcomed as facilitating the reinforcement of the electoral process. During our meetings, our impression was that in the run-up to the elections, the stated ambition of the Independent National Electoral Commission of Nigeria was to improve the electoral process. In addition, we were pleased to learn that in view of these general elections, the number of registered voters had risen by almost 10 million people to a total number of 93.4 million. We were also pleased that almost 40% of the registered voters were people between the ages of 18 and 34 years old, young people. both the present and the future of this country. Nevertheless, these elections faced numerous challenges. During our exchanges, we were made aware of violence, including against Inec, the media, and candidates, which marred the electoral campaign. This atmosphere of insecurity was compounded by cash and fuel shortages. We also heard of vote buying incidents which were said to have had negative impact on the elections. Women need to have an equal say on the future of this country and the direction it will take in the years to come. We are therefore concerned that less than 10% of candidates were women. The next government and parliament should heed the manifestos of the main political parties of Nigeria, which call for affirmative actions such as quotas. Turning to election day, one European Parliament team observed in the center of Abuja, another in the wider federal capital territory and in particularly Kuje, and the third team in the west of Niger state, including in Minna. The atmosphere on election day was relatively peaceful, but better preparation of the election day and a longer voting period, but also more systematic and comprehensive training and information, both of polling officers and voters, as well as simpler and clearer rules on the procedures to follow, could have contributed to reducing much of the problems and resulting tensions. This being said, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to the polling unit staff. Many of them were young people. With goodwill, they did their best to ensure that the election day proceedings ran as smoothly as possible under the circumstances. Above all, I would like to express our admiration for the civic spirit and the enthusiasm shown by the people of Nigeria, who went to vote, as well as their commitment to democracy. I would also like to commend the positive role which security forces played in the polling units which we visited. However, we cannot ignore the substantial number of citizens who did not cast their votes. Nor can we ignore the fact that in some cases during our observation, more transparency was necessary during the counting of the votes. To avoid repeating the statement of our chief observer, I would like to focus on the follow-up to the elections and send a message to the leaders and people of Nigeria. I encourage you to continue demonstrating to the world Nigeria's commitment to a peaceful outcome of the elections and to national unity. We, the 7 members of the European Parliament, condemn those who have incited, supported, or condoned violence in the past weeks. Any disputes regarding the electoral process should be addressed peacefully according to the established legal procedures. The people of Nigeria must be reassured that their trust and hope in these elections and the democratic process as a whole shall be respected. Finally, I would like to reaffirm that EU, as a key partner of this country, will continue supporting Nigeria and its people. The European Parliament, in particular, is committed to enhancing its cooperation with the next government and Parliament in the months and years to come. We believe that this cooperation should and must include accompanying the process of implementation of the EU mission recommendation, as well as the process of adoption and enactment of the necessary reforms. Thank you for your attention.
We don't want to interfere in any way in the political process. Our methodology is very clear in this regard. We make our observations, we answer questions in these settings, and we stand over the findings that we have were able to put in the public domain in this fashion. But we won't interfere in the process. It's a matter entirely for the Nigerian authorities to determine the way forward. If there are challenges that we identify, it is down to the Nigerian authorities to make their decision about how they wish to proceed with those matters. And we base our assessment on the observations received from all of the polling units, and by also cross-checking with other domestic and international observers. We, of course, have, as I pointed out in my opening comments, noted that the election was peaceful in most instances. We noted that the technology worked in many instances, but we also noted
that expectations as the way the technology would transform the transparency of the election, those expectations were not met in a significant number of cases. The operation of the BVAS machines was not, it was significantly impaired in certain areas. We noted the operation of IREV during the course of the evening wasn't what was expected. We noted that in some instances the offline uploading of results onto BVAS machines was not done systematically. So there were other issues that we noted, and but we don't do them on a polling unit per polling unit basis. We simply did it across all of the observations that we obtained across the entire country. As regards making a difference, each election observation mission stands on its own merits, so we deployed here in early January and we began our process then. Nevertheless, our methodology means that we come back sometimes within 3 or 4 years to examine whether or not the previous missions' conclusions and recommendations are leading to actual implementation. And the previous mission came back a year ago and examined the 30 recommendations and found that 13 of them were already implemented or partially implemented, which is, I think, indicative that we do make a difference, that our efforts serve to deepen the roots of democracy here in Nigeria, and we think it's the investment of time and expertise of our core team, our long-term observers, is appreciated, and if there is criticism, it is received in the spirit in which it's given, which is a mutual respect and an insistence on standards of democracy, which Nigeria already aligns itself to, and the standards that are contained in legislation here in Nigeria. We first of all, we acknowledge that Inec had to conduct this election in very challenging circumstances, and we are very conscious that the Electoral Act provides a very important legislative basis and framework that instilled a lot of trust in Inec in the run-up to the election from political participants and encouraged many people to take part. However, the publication of figures in relation to permanent voting cards and how they had been distributed across polling units was not made available. The information about the distribution of permanent voting cards across states was made available very late in the process, so that it was very difficult for civil society and members of the public here in Nigeria to verify or in any way audit the accuracy of those PVC numbers. And clearly that goes to the transparency of the election, and it is an area which we have noted in our preliminary statement. I'll just mention I'll let Evan speak to the question that was directed to her on security in due course. But on visa bans, the mandate of this mission is very clear. It doesn't fall to us to make any comments about visa bans or sanctions of any sort. We're here simply to observe the mission. That's a matter for the European Union, the European Council. We are aware that other jurisdictions have made those calls, but it doesn't fall within the mandate of this mission whatsoever. We can consider it an interference in the process. We're here simply to do that, and that's what has engendered a high degree of trust and credibility on the type of findings, conclusions and recommendations that we make. So I'll hand over, Evan, if you want to address the question about security.
Thank you very much, Barry. I think the statement, we of course condemn all kind of violence that have taken place, and we also call on all actors to adhere and respect the rules that are in place, and in any case of any disputes, that all disputes are sorted out through legal procedures. So